Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on the channel, and today I'm going to be bringing you once again another GTA 5 drift build. Now today's car of choice is going to be the Karin Futo, and this video will show you what I think the best drift build for this car is to get the absolute most out of this car. And I'll also go ahead and show some extra gameplay with some tips, tricks and techniques that you might need to allow you to get the maximum potential out of this car. Now if you do enjoy today's video or find it helpful or informative in any way, please do drop a like on the video, it helps me out massively. And if you do like this style of content, do consider subscribing, as I have a lot more like it on the channel and I plan to make a lot more in the future. All of that being said, I also have a Discord server where I do host car meets and other people host car meets regularly, and you can find tons of people to go hang out with, all of that. But without further ado, let's get into the video. First things first, we're going to start off with the actual drift build, and I'm going to cover all of the essentials that you absolutely must have on the car in order to be able to drift it. And then after that, I'm going to go through the rest of the customization options in case you want to replicate this build. Now, one thing I want to make absolutely clear, and I say this for almost every single drift build I do, but you do not want to buy bulletproof tires. Do not equip them, don't touch them, nothing, okay? Leave them as they are. Do not equip bulletproof tires. The reason that you don't want to do it is it negates the ability for you to stance your car. I'll show you why that's important later, but it will make the car way more difficult to drift. Next thing is transmission. I would recommend for the Futo to keep it stock, as it will allow you to change your gears a lot slower, which allows you to keep it in a lower gear, initiate the mid-drive speed boost a lot more often. Now, engine upgrades and turbo, you want to just max them out as normal as you would for any car. And brakes, I would recommend you keep stock. Now, keeping the brakes on stock will also make them a lot more weak than if you upgraded them, so it won't mess up your drift too much or slow your momentum too much if you do have to slow down or adjust your drift. Now, the next thing I go ahead and mention is your suspension. I personally lower it all the way down. The lower the suspension is on a car, the less grippy it will be, so I just recommend to just slam it the whole way down, and then we'll add in some stance later. And you do not want to equip a spoiler. Adding a spoiler will increase your traction, which will make it a lot harder to drift. Now, all of that being said, now we've got rid of the essentials, let's talk about the rest of the customization options. Moving on to the rest of the upgrades, for armor I currently use 20%, stock brakes as we touched upon, and the stock front bumper. For the rear I use the custom rear bumper. For the engine we max it. For the exhaust I run stock, the rest of it just doesn't appeal to me. For the grille I use the black grille. For the hood I run the stock hood. For the horn, I just want a stock horn and stock lights for the lights option. For livery, I don't run one. I use the blue on white plate, the first one. The primary color is a red crew color. I can leave the RGB down in the comments or the description if you guys like me to. But I run the graphite pearlescent and a classic black for the secondary. It doesn't look too far off of a normal like Grace Red or something, but I just prefer the look of this one. I run the roll cage of the chassis upgrade. I went ahead and didn't use a roof spoiler. I personally am not a fan of how they look. No side skirts. Do not run a spoiler. Drop the suspension all the way down. Stock transmission, max turbo. And on rims I use the tuner ones right here. I am really a fan of these rims. I think they look perfect for an older Japanese car just like this, and run the frost white color on them. Now let's move on to stancing and why it's so important. Now if you haven't caught on already, the reason we did not go ahead and buy bulletproof tires is so we can do the stancing trick. If you don't know how to do it, essentially you want to shoot the bottom half of your rim until the car has the body drop down 2 times. You want to do this for every single wheel until you see it drop. And the reason you're doing this is because the traction of the car and the handling is greatly changed when you do this, to the point where it's way easier to drift once you do this. So do this for every single wheel, and then once the body drops 2 times for every single one, you should be now golden and ready to drift. Now I'm going to just have some gameplay in the background of me drifting the car while I go ahead and talk about some of the techniques and some tips and tricks you might want to follow in order to get this thing drifting, and also some of the pros and cons of this car and this build in general, and why it works for me. So first things first, I think we're going to look at the positives and negatives of this car and this build in particular. And some of the positives are that it's a fairly inexpensive car. I mean, it only costs about 9,000 in Southern San Andreas. You can steal it off the street, so it's pretty much accessible for almost anyone, and it's super easy to get used to. You only need to learn about 2 skills to be able to use this well, which are the mid-drive speed boost and counter steering. You can also learn how to use handbrake drifting, but that's optional. But that mid-drive speed boost is just going to be what drives you for, it's going to be your bread and butter for this drift build, because the car just does not have too much power, so you're going to have to rely on that a lot. So that's going to be touching on one of the negatives of this build and this car in general. It's just that it is on that lower end of power, so you will have to rely on the mid-drive speed boost a lot to get power to those rear wheels to get this thing to actually start sliding anywhere, because let's be honest, I mean, it just is not that fast. You're not gonna have the speed to accommodate for that insane, like, high level of drifting, that super fast kind of stuff you might see with the Banshee or Rapid GT. This car is more suited for those smaller courses, for, you know, tight kind of corners, stuff like inner city drifting or around some obstacles, that sort of thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just that this car is more suited towards that sort of play style. You're not going to be able to pull off anything super insane with this thing, but it can still look good. It's still a super fun car to throw around, and it's super easy to get used to once you've given it a bit of practice. And I'd highly recommend all of you go ahead and take a shot at this thing. I mean, it is very fun to use, and I mean, it costs 9k, why not? Just go for it. In terms of some other tips and whatever you're gonna have to keep in mind with this car, due to its low power, I still highly recommend, if anything you take out of this besides the bulletproof tire stancing, the transmission. If you're confused as to why I leave the transmission stock, if you have it at a lower sort of setting, it's going to take a lot longer for you to change gear, which means that you can do that mid-drive speed boost, or double clutching as some people call it, a lot easier, a lot more consistently. And it's just, you're going to have to spam the mid-drive speed boost, to be fair, if you want to get this thing going for a long time, you want to chain your drifts, whatever, you know, if you're going to have to do that. So learning the mid-drive speed boost is absolutely vital for this car. And as well as that, I'd also recommend that you take a practice at this on some drift tracks. There's tons of them on Social Club, but I'd recommend either trying to drift around on the street, maybe even just go to the docks area where I'm at now, try out some like smaller drift tracks, or maybe even go ahead and practice in some, like, you know, parking lots or something. Maybe using a mix of the handbrake drifting method and the mid-drive method, because both of those will come in together nicely. They tie in well together, and I mean, it's just very similar button input, just timings are a bit different. It's just that this car is very well suited for that, you know, slower kind of inner city tight spaces sort of thing. I mean, I've got some clips in the background to show you as well, but it's nothing too insane. But I'd say it's a very modest, very fun to use drift build. That's a great starter for anybody who just wants to get into drifting, or they want to go ahead and try something a little different, because most people tend to go for the higher powered cars first, and you know, this might be a nice change of pace for some of you. Anyways, I think that's all that needs to be said about this build, and I really do hope that you enjoy it. It's one of my favorite drift builds to use currently for this sort of style, and honestly, I hope you enjoy it as well. Now if you do drop a like down below on the video and consider subscribing for more. But that's going to be all for today. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.